Hi, and welcome to another episode of Kuvera Insights, where we talk to industry leaders and try and figure out how to better manage your family finances. Today, we have two amazing guests, and we're going to talk about a very current topic, which is Bitcoin. So, let me first introduce them. We have Gaurav, who's the founder at Bitbins. It's India's largest digital asset exchange. Prior to that, he started BuyHutke, which is a shopping research destination that has saved over 1,000 crores for users when they shop online. Gaurav is from ID Kharagpur. Has worked for ITC for 45 days, and he quit ITC on Independence Day to start working full time for himself, like true independence. Um, he has some other global first products, include BitDroplet, which is a SIP for Bitcoin, and usemycards.com. So that's Gaurav. We also have Advait, who's a senior journalist with Bloomberg Quint and has been covering banking, finance, and fintech for 3 years now. He was previously with Business Standard and Economics and Political Weekly. Welcome, Advait, and welcome, Gaurav. Let's start with you, Gaurav. Just if you can give us like a very quick, very brief introduction of what is Bitcoin, and then dive
Right.
right into what makes Bitcoin so polarizing, right? In the last 10 years, it's probably been compared to both the tulip mania and also to being a monetary revolution. So which one is it?
Right. Sure. So, with respect to Bitcoin, it has been one of the most polarizing tech innovations over the last few decades, right? So, it has been compared right for, to rat poison from the world's best investors, Warren Buffett, to being a fraud from JP Morgan kind of CEO, to also being called a technological deforce by Bill Gates and a few others, right? So overall, on this side, there are a lot of positives around Bitcoin. The genesis of Bitcoin kind of came into being when in 2008 there was a global financial crisis kind of going along, and there was a monetary stimulus that kind of happened to kind of safeguard the banks, and that's when the genesis kind of came into being, and the creator kind of said the creator is unknown for Bitcoin, and he intended to kind of keep it that way so that that cannot get confiscated or kind of stopped in before it kind of gets to a certain critical mass. So Bitcoin was kind of the white paper came in 2008 after the financial crisis. 2009 is when Bitcoin as a network started operating, and as a whole has since then been operating. There have been 350 plus obituaries written for Bitcoin over the years. A lot of them have kind of predicted Bitcoin to go back to zero. And these are fairly eminent people, right from Nobel laureates like Peter Schiff and a few others. A lot of them have kind of predicted Bitcoin, say, collapsing or going to zero, but it's continued operating, continued growing,
Just to
and
interject
now
though, like, I mean, why were a lot of these eminent people calling for Bitcoin to go to zero? What is it about Bitcoin, and why is there another group of people who are so passionate about it that they will store it regardless of, sometimes even despite of legality issues?
sure. Right. So, in terms of people who are against the Bitcoin, a lot of them primarily do not understand the technological implications of that. And the second is they have other agenda to kind of push forward, right? So, for example, for someone like Warren Buffett, it's more on the technology side, where he has kind of missed the boat on a lot of the technology stocks as well. He did never considered something like an Amazon or Apple or some of these kind of companies to be the right set of investment for still it was kind of at the peak of it, right? 2016, 17 is when Berkshire kind of started getting some sort of exposure. For someone like Peter Schiff, it's more like they're more kind of keen on to gold becoming a dominant store of value and kind of growing further from there. So overall, some of these groups have certain kind of agendas, incentives in place to kind of do that. Some of them fail to understand what's actually kind of happening. Some of them think it's more like a tulip mania that more people are kind of buying into it, and that's why price is going, and it would come crashing down something, right? But overall Bitcoin resembles more like a different monetary mechanism that could be out there, more like a store of value where people can store their wealth. And this has been kind of very important in quite a few jurisdictions. Case in point, Venezuela, right? So Venezuela was the third richest country in the world just about in 1950. It has tremendous oil reserves. It was a very prosperous country in the 50s, 60s, and all. And now there is hyperinflation there, and none of the Venezuelan bolivars have any particular value. So whatever is their wage per se, that can only buy them say some amount of bread or something to kind of go ahead with. So for some of these countries, they have started kind of getting access to currencies like Bitcoin, which kind of help them store the value, right? Which and this has been even valuable even in countries like Syria and all, where there is kind of an oppressive regime who is kind of trying to take assets from people. So that's on that end. For other areas, case in point, like India, right? The rupee kind of depreciates a lot with respect to dollar, and people do not have a way to get dollar exposure because currency repatriation is usually kind of not very seamless, right? So that's kind of frowned upon by the regulators. So as a whole, in the last 12 years, US like the rupee has depreciated over 100% with respect to dollar. And what has the US dollar depreciated with respect to? It's with respect to gold and a currency like and an asset class like Bitcoin, right? So precisely that's when people start realizing. So even the Indian household, the women in India are kind of fairly smart, and they retrospectively, even without understanding of economics, they understand that some part of your wealth should be in gold, and that's precisely why India is one of the largest holders of gold, right? So for a lot of the people, it kind of provides a certain way to kind of store their value. So that those people are kind of on the sidelines. People who are kind of on the technological part of it, where they see value in terms of creating a new monetary ecosystem, which is not kind of getting governed abruptly by a central few people where there is where fairly large stimulus happening and some of these that kind of motivates them, and overall Bitcoin as a whole decentralizes things. So I as a person can instantly send money anywhere across the world, and that's kind of fairly powerful as a mechanism.
Got it. Got it. So see that kind of brings us to the second point, which is that this has policy implications. Like so, if you can just talk a little bit about what has been RBI's stance on Bitcoin and what's the current stance on Bitcoin that you see, and how do you see this play out in the future? Is there a risk that the current legal structure or legal status that is provided to Bitcoin will that continue? Can that be reversed?
Right.
It would be good
So
to know.
I think for the regulators, whether it's the RBI or the government or let's say the Securities and Exchange Board, two major worries is of course money laundering, terrorism financing, criminal activity, drug trade, those kind of aspects. And in the Supreme Court order, when they were detailing what the RBI's arguments were, these were the main issues that the RBI had raised. Now, my understanding is that the amount of terrorism financing or any of these criminal activities where it's been proven that they've used Bitcoin through the Indian banking system or through Indian exchanges, there isn't much. There have been Bitcoin scams or Ponzi schemes that have unearthed. Basically, that's just any fraudulent activity where someone is saying, I'll give you Bitcoins, but they've run away with your money. So I think from the regulator standpoint, AML, KYC is the main issue for them. So, and that's just from a compliance standpoint. And my understanding is that most crypto exchanges, and probably Gaurav can also talk about this a little later, is that they are proactively doing the KYC checks and the AML checks because they would rather be regulated on that front in the same standard as any, let's say, payment app or any of these new fintechs that have come out, any of these new technologies that people are using, UPI, Bharat Bill payments or anything. So they'd rather be on the same page that the other companies that are regulated by the RBI or the NPCI or SEBI, for instance. But at the same time, because there is a lack of standardization in the industry, the regulator has to push it. Now, the other
But
problem
just to
is,
interject here, Advait, right?
yeah,
If anonymity is the core feature of Bitcoin that allows decentralization, then does not KYC and AML just kill it? And
yeah, I think that anonymity
how does
argument has
that work?
expired. I do feel
Okay,
the
okay,
anonymity argument has expired a little bit. I mean, I've been following Bitcoin since college, right, years
sure.
ago, and that was the main sort of marketing thing about Bitcoins. It's anonymous trading, and to an extent, it is rather anonymous today. But today, IP tracing is your main uh, sort of tool that crypto exchanges use because they have to use it now. At least internationally, wherever the monetary authorities, whether it's the SEC in America or the Monetary Authority of Singapore, wherever they have come out with regulations, they have made IP tracing a major part of the cryptocurrency exchanges compliance requirement. Because what happens is, in case there is a crime committed or in case they need to do any asset tracing, you have to find out who sold it. So no one will ever know Advait sold bitcoins on X date at this price. But if they have to do it at some level for investigative purposes or fraud compliance purposes, they will be able to do an IP trace, for instance. So it is still anonymous, but at the back end there is still some amount of checks in place. So I do think the 100% anonymity argument is expired. I think world over there has been a push towards regulation, and that's happened. I think in India, the biggest problem is there is no clear strategy from the government's end on who has to regulate. Because, and I think there's still confusion in the world generally. Um, Even the SEC regulations, they're neither treating Bitcoin as a currency or a medium of exchange. They have treated it more as a security asset. The Monetary Authorities of Singapore, which is the sort of central bank, is treating it also as a security asset and a currency of exchange. So I think in India, if there was a clear strategy on what the use case would be. So if you say that bitcoins are only meant to be invested for investment purposes, then ideally that should come under the Securities and Exchange Board. If you're going to look at decentralized technology, which is blockchain, then the Niti Aayog or the Ministry of IT and Electronics has already, they're very gung ho about blockchain, and there are many government projects on that. So whether you're regulating the underlying technology, whether you're trying to regulate crypto exchanges where you're trading these assets and using it as a security value, or you're going into a different realm, which is you use the crypto token, let's say an Ethereum, to trade for actual real goods and real assets. So if you're purchasing land through Bitcoin, so that becomes a medium of exchange. That would come under the RBI's purview. So just your last part of your question where you said, what is the legal changes? So I think initially the RBI was obviously scared about AML, KYC, and terrorism financing. So which is why they brought in that circular that basically told the banks, you cannot partner and you cannot provide services to any cryptocurrency exchange through the banking system. The Supreme Court basically said the RBI could have done a different, could have gone at the problem differently rather than an umbrella sort of ban on the banking system. And what we understand, and we reported this a few weeks ago, is that the government is planning to introduce another banning cryptocurrency legislation. So there was one committee that was set up last year under the former finance secretary. I think the committee provided a bill. It is unclear right now whether that same bill will be reintroduced with some changes, or they will go through an entirely new process where a new committee will be set up. There'll be more industry participation to do it. And my understanding is that could be a little bit geopolitical because of China launching their own crypto. So the Indian government might be looking at that way. But again, this is all speculation. We don't know what the government's thinking is. But if the government decided to segregate all your cryptocurrencies into different use cases and then give it under the relevant authority, whether it's SEBI, IRDAI, RBI, it could also go into the land and labor sort of regulations when you use land or labor, sort of registrations on blockchain, things like that. I mean, it entirely depends on what the strategy and the use case of the technology or the asset would be. So I think there's no clear consensus on that from the government side or from the regulators side.
So Gaurav, coming back to you, right? Like the more you regulate it, the more blocks and checks and balances you put around it, then it basically becomes just a use case for. It just becomes a point of like a proof of concept for blockchain.
Right.
And then if it's almost like if a government says, hey, you know what, there is USD and then there is a crypto USD, which is by the way also regulated by the Fed. It's just
Right.
USD which is on a blockchain, but it has the same strengths and weaknesses that USD has. So it kind of loses some of that advantages that Bitcoin was supposed to bring in that utopic, in that world where you had true decentralized currency which was not dependent on the whims and fancies of central banks. So is that where this is going eventually? Because more and more businesses are going to realize that regulation opens up a bigger market for us as a block technology provider than purely sticking to the ideals for which BTC was, initially created.
Right. So it would be layers of say players in the market, right? So the initial BTC is the cyberpunk sort of people who do not want to kind of reveal their KYC, do not want to kind of sign up on an exchange and kind of leave traces and all. So those people do not want to essentially even deal with fiat for transactions and all per se, right? So that would be a very small chunk of the population, and that would never lead to mainstream adoption, right? So this is what most exchanges kind of realized in the last 2 3 years, that if you want to bring in mainstream users, you need to ensure regulations are in place, investor protection is happening, and quite a few of these things that usually kind of facilitate seamless transactions that normally all other equities or commodities exchange adopt, that needs to kind of happen in place, right? So, and that's where that push was there. Now there is a lot of confusion in the asset class, right? So earlier, because of the term, right? So the term kind of says virtual currency or cryptocurrency. The term itself is confusing. It already kind of names it as a currency. Now anything which is currency comes under the purview of RBI, and no sovereign nation wants to kind of lose the the option or the access in terms of how currency kind of gets governed in their country, right? So that itself kind of made a fairly negative notion in the minds of all the regulators per se, right? And this, when you kind of see the backdrop of the RBI circular that kind of came in 2018, it was 2017 and when the crypto boom started happening. There was a lot of kind of crypto uptake that happened at that point in time, and UPI was just launched. So at that point in time, it was also considered that if this becomes a medium of exchange under domestic transfers and all, that could become a threat to UPI. And overall, RBI or the MPCI did not want anything to kind of come even close to that, right? So UPI as a whole had to kind of succeed, and that's precisely where that sort of a thing kind of came in. So RBI essentially decided that, hey, we'll kind of cut off the oxygen towards all these activities that kind of happen with respect to trading or exchange with respect to crypto as a whole, will kind of cut out the oxygen by removing payment processing access or banking access to all of these, right? And that actually happened. So after the circular, 95% of the trading volumes went down. Exchanges, the largest exchanges like Zepay, Coinbase, and some of these that were operating kind of closed post that, and it had the sort of effect that it was RBI intended to kind of have. But the challenge with something like this is we started realizing as exchange, we started kind of talking with a few people, and they said, "Ki, now the cash transactions have started increasing because direct banking transactions are not happening, cash transactions started happening, and there is no way to kind of govern cash transactions, right?" And that's precisely, and it also kind of started leading to a lot more fraud, where people, instead of dealing on, say, an exchange that's kind of doing KYC or all of those kind of checks and balances, people are doing it via listing sites like a local Bitcoin or even things like OLX and Quicker, and that kind of led to a lot of fraud where people used to send money beforehand and never used to receive bitcoins and other things, right? So now from this context, we've started kind of liaising with SEBI and trying to make them understand that Bitcoin as a whole resembles a lot of properties near to gold, right? It's like a store of value. It is kind of democratized, not controlled by anyone, sufficiently distributed across the world and accepted in most jurisdictions per se. It's not illegal in any country per se that way. So all those kind of things are there, and overall, you already govern commodities as a whole with the commodities exchange. You can essentially create the same rule framework and add additional things with respect to Bitcoin. As an exchange, what we do is we already follow 50 to 60% of the norms that are given to brokers or say something like a national stock exchange, so that that creates a stronger case to kind of get that governed, right? Overall, for Bitcoin to become mainstream as an asset class, this sort of a layer that we are trying to bring with a fiat sort of a gateway is essential. And that's when people going forward who wants to kind of who are kind of specific towards anonymity and all of those would kind of happen. But these two things are not going to, like, the set of investors or the traders that would be out there are diametrically different. So someone who kind of cares for privacy, anonymity, and all is never going to sign up on an exchange like us, because we take KYC from the users. We take KYC, have the checks and balances in place, and have clearly mentioned that if there is some sort of say criminal complaint or case that is kind of out there, will comply with law authorities and will kind of help them kind of resolve that, right? So our stance is kind of clear. If someone wants to kind of trade on something else, they have like decentralized exchanges and all, but KYC kind of is not mandatory. So but mainstream users are not never going to kind of go to a decentralized exchange, because the user experience is so complicated that even say for me, it took about an hour to kind of understand how this works. And there is a fairly high chance that you might lose your seed key and private key and other things, and you would lose access to your asset. So that's the overall dichotomy. For mainstream adoption of crypto, fiat gateway across every single jurisdiction in the world is needed, and that's when more users are going to come, and regulation needs to be in place, and that's where we're trying to kind of tell SEBI, hey, the virtual currency threat or it becoming a payment mechanism is not going to come true. No one is going to use BTC for paying something to buy a coffee or something of that sort, because they're investing in it for a gain over a period of time. So to a certain extent, it resembles a security there, but overall, it's acting more like a store of value as well. And if you don't regulate it, some of these activities are kind of essentially still going to happen, right?
What's the perception of Bitcoin out there? I mean, what is driving this demand? I mean, are people, in your opinion, looking at this as a speculative asset, which is what you mostly hear? Are people looking at it, just to make a quick buck? And there was a time when you could really make a quick buck, right? Like from morning to evening, you would make 10% and sometimes more. And is that what's catching people's fancy? Do people really think of this as a store of value, like traditionally they have thought about for gold? And what's your view? How is the end user actually interacting with this new, let's call it, for a lack of a better word, technology that they cannot classify whether it's currency or an asset class or a store of value?
I'm actually not too familiar. I mean, I don't know many investors in cryptos, barring some online forums and Twitter. People keep commenting there. But I would say the investor class is fairly younger, obviously, compared to the equity markets or even the debt markets. And I would say that at the end of the day, I think most people still own a mutual fund. I don't think that business has gone away. SIP market has continued to grow because of younger people coming into the working age population. But I feel that there is a split in the investor class. One is perhaps a slightly more educated population of investors who understand the technology. And they know this is a 20-year game, this is a 30-year game, that 20, 30 years from now, we will be using Bitcoins, maybe as a currency. Maybe we'll be using it for other reasons, or we'll be using other crypto assets such as Ethereum, Ripple, and those will, the use cases for those are going to change over time. And they're in it for the long haul. They know that's going to happen in 20, 30 years. So might as well get in now and hold on to it. And because if you get in now, because of the supply sort of dynamics to do with Bitcoin or with Ethereum or any of these crypto assets, might as well get in now and hope for the best on the long term, because ultimately a digital currency or a digital asset is the future. I think over the next 50 years, currency notes is going to go away. I think that you can already see that happening with UPI to an extent, that people who are very educated about UPI, the various apps, what the features are, use less currency notes. It's obviously a very, very small population compared to the population of India, but I think that trend is already, you could start sort of looking at that trend. And then I think there's a larger class of investors who perhaps were a little scared after the RBI sort of banned or told the banks that you shouldn't work with the cryptocurrency exchanges or with crypto companies. So they held back. And I think they saw the price movements in Bitcoin, and then they got in as in any which way they could. So a lot of the crypto exchanges were doing P2P models. And now after the Supreme Court order, they've gone back to a regular model where, their payment gateway is extracting money out of the account. So I think there's a fear of missing out aspect to it, that now that the Supreme Court has reversed the RBI's position, and today there is no clear position by the regulator, nor by the RBI, nor by the government, that cryptocurrencies are banned. Anyone trading in it would be a criminal. It's not a fact of law today. So I think people have realized that you might as well get in today, and I think a younger population would
not explicitly not allowed, then it is allowed.
Yeah, exactly. So people are getting in mainly because of that reason. I think there's a fear of missing out aspect, that if you don't get in now, it's just going to get more expensive to get in later. And with another Bitcoin halving, which probably I'll ask, I have a question for Gaurav on that. There is a question of, eventually Bitcoin ka supply is going to end. And then if I've not got a Bitcoin, or if I've not got a fork of Bitcoin, which is the Bitcoin Cash or any of these things, those will also start getting more expensive. So either I'm buying in to wait for those forks to happen, and then I make money on that, or I'm in it for the long haul because I know this is a 20, 30 year game.
Right. So interestingly, for the last 2 years, the perception was at the lowest possible point. So even my parents used to ask, "Beta, tum kuch illegal to nahi kar." So I had to kind of explain them because they used to read a lot of media content, and a lot of these regional media over exaggerate a lot. Like they used to read a Marathi newspaper, and Marathi newspaper was like, Bitcoin, if you use, you'll probably get jailed and all of that. And that kind of created a lot of sense of fear. Beta, isliye tumko IIT nahi karaya tha ki tum ye sab karo. So I had to kind of explain them. So overall perception was that. And that was not just with them, but even top banking officials or even some regulators to a certain extent. That was kind of the perception. Isn't that illegal? And even outside India, like almost everyone outside India used to kind of consider it's like when I went to a conference in Singapore and I said, "Hey, I operate a crypto exchange in India," and they're like, "Does that is that even legal?" So those are few things. What RBI did was RBI does not frame a law. RBI had said the banking entities under its purview would not kind of offer services to crypto exchanges. So as a crypto exchange, we could legally kind of still operate. It's when the government creates a law that's when it kind of is crystal clear about you can operate or not. So that's one aspect to it. In terms of investors, right? What we see is predominantly 78% of our users are between 20 to 32. There is only a 20% overlap between our users and users of stock trading accounts. So maybe Zerodha, maybe anything else. And that was very surprising for us because they started the journey right from crypto itself, like their trading part of it, or journey kind of started with crypto itself. And they later kind of discovered stock, and stock trading is not very exciting for them because it's in a particular duration, like it's not 24/7 market. That's number one. Few of them are already also in colleges, so in the college time they can't trade. So after college is when they can kind of come back to home, they can start trading. So that's one interesting aspect to it. The second aspect to it in terms of investors, like, so we kind of have two products. One is specific to traders, one is specific to investors, which is a Bitcoin SIP tool. And what we observed was in the investors investors product, we have twice the female audience than in trading. So in trading, we just have like 8% of the users, which are kind of typically say women, and in that 8% also, some of the husbands are using their wife's KYC to kind of circumvent tax laws and everything. Okay, so that
You
bit of
should
it.
Gaurav, quickly, do you have any idea of kind of, what would be the average median age of, the investors and the speculators? And I'm using the word speculators loosely, I mean traders. What's the,
So yeah, so median is kind of boils down around 27. So
okay.
that's
So not that
and
young. So that this is like, this is like about 3-4 years into the work environment, right?
right, right, right. So that's there. The people say plus 40 and all that overlap is very very low with crypto and equities. Like they're a lot more circumspect. Their first question, if I talk with someone, is, "Ki, how do I file the taxes?" Like for a person who's in 23, 24, 25 sort of an age, he's not very concerned on that. He's more concerned कि volatility कैसी है, कैसे move करता है and everything. For a person who's 40, he's like, how do I file the tax? His first question kind of comes along on that, right? So because and they're like at least the perception has changed after the Supreme Court ruling because it was kind of covered fairly by the media and all. And again, there's some sort of again doubt. Like recently, when the article came in, some people started saying, hey, "Is that going to get enacted and everything?" So like it would take its time. No one knows what's exactly the content of the bill. Let's wait for it. Let's see what's kind of out there. And some departments are definitely going to be positive. Like the income tax department is kind of positive because some people have filed their taxes on crypto and people have made a significant amount of money from trading as a whole, right? So some departments might be positive, some might kind of have a negative context on that, and overall that would kind of lead to some sort of discussion and then some sort of amendments to the bill would kind of happen. So that's going to happen, but as a whole, in terms of the investor mix, that's kind of fairly skewed towards, say, for trading, it's 90% plus male, 92%. And for investing as a whole, 16% are women right now, which is interesting that women are more interested into the investing aspect of it rather than the trading part of it. Do you see some sort of a similar mix even with on your platform per se? With respect to
we don't have stocks, right? So there's not much trading that happens. But what we've seen is that, and we actually put out some data on the same as well, that participation of women in mutual fund investing has gone up. I think at one point it was as low as, at least the data from our platform, from as low as like 15 to 16% to now close to 30%.
Wow.
And this is over the last 7-8 years, and this is also kind of some of the data that we have imported from people, right? And there's always, even with mutual fund accounts, there's always this question whether they are actually investing or is someone else managing it. Now, we definitely believe, and we see a lot of this data, that a lot of them are actually managing it themselves. Because I mean, if I even break it down, because we know the marital, even if we break it down to single women, that percentage has improved dramatically. So I don't completely buy into that idea that it's that they're not managing their investments and capital themselves anymore. I think those things are changing dramatically, especially in that, I would say, in the 25 to 35 age group where a lot of women work. I mean, it's not an uncommon thing, especially in the large metros. So that dynamic will, I think, continue to change. So one final question before we wrap up. What are your two big predictions about Bitcoin in India? Let's start with you, Advait, and then we'll finish off with you, Gaurav.
I think Bitcoin it's going to go through its own cycle. Obviously, I think maybe next year there'll be another halving because the interest will just increase. And I do feel like the number of users will increase because at least the cryptocurrency exchanges, I've not seen much of a marketing push by them beyond whatever little they could have done on social media. And I think whoever's interested in it will find Bitbins or WazirX or any of these players, so they will go and open accounts. But I think over the next year that you will see a larger marketing push by them. I know all of them work together to kind of push out a lot more education about Bitcoin to kind of reduce the number of rumor mongering about whether this is safe or not safe. I think the communication that I've seen is that you should be invested in these for the long haul. So I do feel the market will grow for sure. It will go back to its 2017 levels. I think, sorry, the 2018 levels prior to the ban. I think the levels are more than 50% down from what it was back then. But as Bitcoin increases, I think that will happen. But what I'm more interested in is the other cryptocurrencies and whether those will take off. Because I think world over, people are kind of fed up with Bitcoin in the sense that it's such a volatile crypto asset that if you haven't got in before, you're going to go through a lot of cycles of pain before you even get your gain out. So you might as well start buying some other cryptocurrencies and try to get into the universe of it rather than just
you buy
focus on
the
Bitcoin.
you buy the Bitcoin for Bitcoin. What Bitcoin did to USD, you buy the asset that's going to go to.
Correct.
That's actually
So either
it's
you buy
almost
the
like
forks or you look at something like a Ripple or an Ethereum and you buy into that
fair
because
enough.
of whatever use cases those will provide you later on.
Fair enough. And at least in the case of Ripple, they claim to have a economic use case which is
Correct. So Ripple
slightly
works with
more.
the banks, and I
Yes.
think Ethereum. My understanding of Ethereum is that he's trying to build an entire universe of apps on the Ethereum platform. So it's like let's say, just call it a new operating system. So I think those are exciting, but people need to understand that use case. I think Bitcoin's a lot easier
They have
to.
to see it in action. I think that's the
Correct.
bigger thing, right? I
Sure.
mean, you
Sure.
can say this is going to be this, a
Exactly.
new
Exactly.
operating system of the future, but then my first question will be at least show me two apps.
Yeah. So
Then I'll
that's the
believe you
point
that the
about
next 20 will
regulations.
come.
I was trying to say is that Bitcoin would be more of an asset, or you can regulate it as a currency also. Whereas an Ethereum and all would have to be something a little different, where Ethereum would be more of a technology focused crypto asset rather than Bitcoin, which is more of a currency of exchange or an investing thing. So I think people need to understand the differences more. I think we're still a very nascent stage. Those who understood it and those who are sort of positive about it, I think they're already in the market. So I expect the market to grow as more people get educated.
And what about you, Gaurav? Your top two predictions?
Right. So
Outside of
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin is going to reach 50,000 next year.
So in the next at least 22 months, it would definitely cross its all-time high. The reason for that is there is a lot of dry powder in the market. Like because of the quantitative easing, there is a lot of money that has kind of flown into the market, and some of that money is going to get allocated in also some of these sectors. Prominent investors, someone like Paul Tudor Jones and few of them have kind of come along saying, hey, I have certain couple of percent allocation into Bitcoin, right? So when that sort of a thing happens, that kind of brings a lot of hedge funds to take notice and start kind of looking into it. So that's in terms of trading, that's kind of already happening with some of the largest firms kind of setting up that around trading crypto as a whole. And when things like, say, Fidelity is kind of fairly bullish on Bitcoin and they're kind of having a crypto custody of themselves that they're kind of going to provide to institutions. When that sort of things kind of come into place, that's going to kind of scale along things for Bitcoin. As a whole, it's always that the top of the index usually does not get shuffled a lot. So think of it this way that Reliance would always has always remained in the top 10 companies across the last 30, 40 years, right? Similarly, in say case in point in US, Microsoft, Intel, Apple, some of these companies have kind of always remained that, and that would kind of remain true for even Bitcoin. The index of something that kind of remains, right? From a user, they might kind of see larger gains in some of these other new emerging crypto per se. But Bitcoin is the safer option for them. There is volatility. That's why you systematically invest in it rather than kind of try and time the market. So systematically invested like an SIP. But overall, my prediction, 24 months, we crossed the all-time high. Irrespective of whether any specific jurisdiction participates in that or not, it's a matter of game theory. If some like jurisdictions start opening up, you essentially over a period of time need to kind of open up, and that has happened with Thailand. Thailand initially kind of banned crypto trade and everything in 2013 and 2017. They had to kind of reverse it entirely. Now they've kind of regulated it, issue licenses and everything kind of happens that way. Same was with UAE. UAE kind of restricted it in some form or the other. Now we were talking with the Abu Dhabi Financial Authority to kind of figure out what our structure could be kind of out there. So overall, that's going to be true for a lot of jurisdictions. 24 months, we crossed the all-time high.
Perfect. So that's amazing. Great to have both of you here. Thanks, Advait. Thanks, Gaurav. And hopefully, everyone watching this probably learned a lot about Bitcoin, where we have come from and where this might go, and whether this is an asset or whether this is a currency or whether this is a store of value more akin to gold. You have any more questions, feel free to ask us. We'll make sure that we answer as many of them as we can. Thank you.